We went from arcades to home consoles to portable gaming to shooting games to simulation games to subscription services to motion controls, then back to mobile games, but this time on cell phones, then to eSports, crafting games, to watching other people play games, then to cloud and VR gaming, then most recently to console mobile hybrid gaming. Trends are funny, aren't they? We can't talk about the history of video game trends without starting at the very beginning with Pong, the first commercially successful arcade video game released in 1972. The arcades went through a bit of a slump after this, but then Space Invaders and Pac-Man were released in 1978 and 1980 respectively, reinvigorating the arcade market. Pac-Man alone generated more than $1 billion in arcade sales in the United States in 1 year. Of course, the video game market would go on to crash just a few short years later in 1983, due to market saturation and high-budget, poor-quality ports like E.T. the Extraterrestrial. But then thankfully we got the Nintendo Entertainment System and Super Mario Bros. In 1985, which allowed the video game industry to make a swift recovery. In 1988, Sega released the Mega Drive in Japan, or the Genesis as it was known here in the US, which was actually surprisingly trendy at the time. It sold roughly 3 times more units than the Sega Master System, which had come before it. You wouldn't guess it nowadays, since Sega's been out of the home console market for over 2 decades now, but at one point their gaming systems were making some serious cash. 1 year after the release of the Genesis, Nintendo released their Game Boy handheld, and would pretty much go on to dominate the handheld gaming market for the next 20 years, until the release of smartphones. Sega would try to compete with the Game Gear in 1990, but because it had a backlit colored screen, it went through batteries like crazy, and it just didn't get the support that the colorless, non-backlit Game Boy would receive. In 1993, Doom popularized the first-person shooter genre with its release on Microsoft DOS, before later being ported to basically everything. Fun fact, did you know you can play Doom on a pregnancy test? I'm not joking, look it up. We then saw the release of the Sony PlayStation and the Sega Saturn in 1994, which popularized the use of CDs for video games instead of cartridges, at least for home consoles. Nokia released cell phones with the game Snake, the first popular mobile game, in 1997. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. With the release of the PlayStation in 1994 and the Nintendo 64 in 1996, the 3D mascot platformer was now on the rise. 2D mascot platformers had been around since the release of Mario way back in 1985, but now all of a sudden everyone had to figure out how to make games in 3D. You could say just 3D games in general were becoming trendy, though I hesitate to call it a trend since 3D games would basically become the norm from then on. And the phrase trend at least somewhat implies that the subject lessened in popularity at some point. This was when I personally fell in love with gaming. I had dabbled in 2D Mario and some basic point-and-click PC games as a toddler, but when I saw Spyro the Dragon wandering around freely in a big open field of grass, I was smitten, mesmerized even. And that's not even mentioning the fact that this is right before Pokemon would come out in North America. The original Red and Green version were released in Japan in 1996, but 2 years later in 1998, they would hit the States and cause Pokemania. I could make a whole other video about Pokemania, but you know, it was kind of a big deal. In the year 2000, EA would release The Sims on PC, which was the first majorly successful life simulation game. Harvest Moon had a decent following before this, but it had nowhere near the popularity that The Sims would see. Of course, when it comes to life simulation and farming games, there are at least 1 or 2 popular series that would later become at least somewhat close to The Sims as far as popularity goes, but we'll get back to that later. In 2001, Microsoft released the Xbox, the first home console with an integrated Ethernet port, slowly but surely cementing the internet in the future of console gaming, with the launch of Xbox Live, a subscription service for online multiplayer gaming popularized through the Halo series of games, which were another huge trend in their own right. Halo, released in 2001, and Call of Duty, released in 2003, would both go on to dominate the gaming scene for years to come. World of Warcraft launched on PC in 2004 and would quickly become the most successful subscription-based online role-playing game to date, growing to more than 14 million subscribers. The most notable massively multiplayer online games released before this point were Ultima Online in 1997, RuneScape in 2001, and Lineage 2 in 2003. Ultima Online peaked at around 250,000 subscribers in 2003 before a steady decline ultimately resulting in the system shutting down in 2004. No pun intended. RuneScape is a little harder to judge because they have a free subscription model, but then you can also get a paid subscription, and there are like 3 or 4 different versions of the game. But as far as I can tell, at its peak it was at 1.1 million paid subscribers. Lineage 2 got a little closer to WoW, but didn't hit that 14 million mark until just recently. But to this date, nothing has reached the total player count of WoW, estimated to have 137 million total players. There are a few gaming trends that have stood out more than others. For me, it was Pokemon, first-person shooters, and then this next one, waggle controls. The Nintendo Wii launched bundled with a copy of Wii Sports in 2006, targeting a wide demographic of families and non-gamers, spreading what was once a niche hobby for little kids and geeks to basically everyone. Everyone wanted their game on the Wii, which was kind of hilarious because it was so underpowered compared to the PS3 and Xbox 360 that launched around the same time. But those motion controls were such a novelty at the time. The closest things we had in gaming up until that point were the NES Power Glove and Light Gun, which never really took off outside of a few specific games. The Wiimote, as it was called, just had so much broader appeal. At least for a few years, the Wii sold like hotcakes. Once the iPhone released the next year in 2007, and then Angry Birds in 2009, there was no going back. Gaming was now for everyone. The PlayStation 3 released in 2006 as the first game console to allow the playback of Blu-ray DVDs, and while Blu-rays themselves would catch on, the PS3 itself wouldn't catch on until much later. The console was a meme when it released, with people making fun of how it cost $599 US, a price that still seems absurd even in the backwards economy of 2024. I mentioned just a moment ago that Angry Birds launched in 2009. That's what really sparked the freemium model that so many games use nowadays, particularly in the mobile gaming market. Yep, you can thank the people who paid for in-app purchases in Angry Birds for some of the scummy game industry practices you see in the current gaming landscape. Pay to win, cash shops, microtransactions, loot boxes, it all started there. Or at least that's when the industry as a whole started noticing and implementing similar features into their own games. League of Legends released the same year as Angry Birds in 2009 with a similar freemium model, but LOL is a multiplayer online battle arena game, and it would quickly become the world's largest esport. Minecraft would launch its public beta a year later in 2010, and I feel like I don't need to tell you how big of a deal that became. Don't worry, we'll get to Grand Theft Auto soon. Twitch launched a year after Minecraft in 2011, and the two things just sort of went hand in hand perfectly. It's almost poetic in a way. Candy Crush launched on mobile phones a year after that, taking in-app purchases to a whole new level. Did I say Angry Birds and League of Legends popularized scummy video game business models? I was wrong. It was Candy Crush. Moms and little kids just had to get their fix. They just had to get access to that next level. They just had to watch and click on those dumb little ads for terrible looking games that probably don't even exist, at least not in the way they're advertised. Thanks, little kids and moms. Grand Theft Auto 5 launched in 2013 and earned $800 million in one day. Pokemon Go, an augmented reality mobile game, launched in 2016 and reached 500 million downloads in 1 year. That makes Stardew Valley's release, also in 2016, sound modest in comparison. Stardew Valley only sold 30 million copies. Of course, it would spawn a ridiculously huge number of indie copycats. Farming and life simulation games are still trendy to this day. It seems like there's another couple of dozen announced at each new Summer Games Fest or Game Awards. And Stardew Valley itself just got another major update just a few weeks ago. The first major commercial gaming virtual reality headsets also launched in 2016. The Oculus Rift and PlayStation VR. They did okay, but I hesitate to call them trendy. The Oculus sold around 1.5 million units, and the PSVR sold around 4.7 million units as of the end of 2019. The Nintendo Switch released a year after the Oculus in 2017, and I feel like this is when things started getting at least somewhat normal again in the gaming industry. We finally had a high-definition handheld Nintendo console. Not only that, but it was a hybrid. You could play it both at home on the TV and on the go. The Switch was such a cool idea, and it might still be my all-time favorite gaming device to this day. But that normalcy wouldn't last long. Fortnite, a free-to-play battle royale that was already out on PC and consoles, was ported to mobile phones in 2018, and with that, the game absolutely exploded. Now we got, Rick Sanchez, Thanos, Peter Griffin, and Goku doing these silly dances together while shooting at each other? I don't get it, but I guess the kids like it for some reason. Of course I can't say anything. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is one of my favorite games of all time, and some people would say that character roster is just as absurd. Those people are wrong. Mario, Sonic, Pac-Man, and Mega Man are all classic, timeless characters, but I guess I can see where they're coming from. In 2020, Epic Games entered a legal battle with Apple, resulting in Fortnite being removed from the iPhone App Store. The PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X, and Series S were released, and Microsoft, Nvidia, Google, and Amazon all launched cloud gaming services, most of which still aren't very popular. The Google Stadia was discontinued last year, though I guess Xbox Game Pass is still doing pretty well for them. Remember earlier when I said VR hadn't really gotten trendy yet? The Oculus Quest 2 sort of changed that in 2020. Since then, the Quest series of devices has gone on to ship more than 20 million units as of the beginning of 2023. Of course, 2020 is also when certain global events happened, so I guess people were eager to get their hands on whatever new indoor experiences they could have at the time. Now it's the year 2024, and it seems like every month we're getting a new flavor of the month style game. In 2020, we got Animal Crossing, Doom Eternal, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Genshin Impact, and Among Us, which is funny because Among Us actually released 2 years earlier in 2018. In 2021, we got... well, 2021 wasn't a great year for gaming. Final Fantasy XIV got really trendy in 2021 for some reason, but that's about it. In 2022, we got God of War, Elden Ring, Horizon Forbidden West, Pokemon Legends Arceus, Splatoon 3, and Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. In 2023, we got The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, Hogwarts Legacy, Spider-Man 2, the Resident Evil 4 remake, Final Fantasy XVI, Alan Wake 2, and Baldur's Gate 3. And now in 2024, we've already gotten Pal World, which has sold an astounding 25 million copies. Wouldn't be surprised if it's 30 million by the time this video comes out. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and Persona 3 Reload. You know, I didn't even mention the remake and remaster trend. When did that start? Maybe in the PS3 and Xbox 360 era? Maybe even earlier. I guess you could consider games like Frogger on the PlayStation a remake of Frogger the arcade game. Or going back even further, you could consider every version of Tetris that's come out since the original 1984 version a remake of that early computer version. But remakes and remasters definitely seem to be more popular now than they were a couple decades ago. Right? Or is it just me? Let me know in the comments. Also, let me know if there are any popular gaming trends that you think I missed, or what you think the next big trend will be. I'm gonna say inflatable controllers. Thanks for watching.
What?